Chapter 6 of The Adventures of Mabel by Harry Peck. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6 Walter and the Goat. When Uncle Robert gave Rex to Mabel, Walter felt rather hurt to think that he had no pet of any kind for his own. And after Towser came, he grew more and more unhappy. He was a whole year older than Mabel, and he was a boy too, and it seemed hard that she should have two animals and he none. He used to complain about it to Grandma, and she told him that perhaps he could have a pony when he grew older, but this did not satisfy him, and sometimes he was very sulky about it. One day, when both Mabel and Grandma were out, he said to himself that he would have a ride on Rex, because it wasn't fair that Mabel should have the horse all to herself. He led Rex out of the barn, and managed to get the bridle on him, and to climb up on his back. But the next minute Rex made a rush across the yard, and the clothesline caught Walter under the arms and pulled him off, and gave him a bad fall on the ground. When Grandma came home, she found Rex eating grass on the lawn, and Walter crying on the kitchen steps, with his legs and arms all black and blue. After that he didn't want to try riding Rex any more, but he made up his mind that he would like some kind of a pet that he would be better able to manage. At last, when his birthday came, he went down to see Uncle Robert, who always gave him a birthday present. This time Walter decided to ask for what he wanted. He found Uncle Robert sitting on a steamer chair under the big oak tree on the lawn smoking. "Good morning, Uncle Robert," said Walter. "It's my birthday today." "So it is," said Uncle Robert. "You're getting on in life, aren't you? What do you think you would like for a present?" "Well," said Walter, hesitating a little, "I've been thinking it over, and I've made up my mind that I should like a goat." "A goat?" cried Uncle Robert. "Well, well, what do you want a goat for?" "Oh," said Walter, "a goat would be just splendid. I could play with him just as Mabel does with Rex, and I could harness him up to a goat wagon and make him carry me all around. It would be lots of fun. Do give me a goat, won't you, Uncle Robert?" "Ha, ha!" laughed Uncle Robert. "Why, I've got a goat on the place now that you can have if you really want him. But I fancy he's a pretty frisky sort of a goat. Do you think that you can manage him?" "Oh, yes," cried Walter. "Just give him to me and see. Please, Uncle Robert?" "Well, come on," said Uncle Robert. "I'll let you have a look at him. He's out back of the stable." So they walked around to find him, Walter getting greatly excited. Sure enough, there he was, a large black goat with a long beard and two horns that curved back over his head like crullers. He was fastened by a rope to a big post, and was eating the advertisements out of a newspaper. When he saw Uncle Robert and Walter coming, he cocked his eye at them, but said nothing. "Oh," cried Walter, "isn't he a splendid big goat? Just the kind I wanted. I'll make him drag me all over everywhere." The goat smiled. "Yes," said Walter, "I think he's even big enough for me to ride on his back the way Mabel does on Rex." The goat bit a large Sapulo advertisement out of the newspaper, and laughed very softly all to himself. "So, you like his looks, do you, Walter?" said Uncle Robert. "Well, then, he's your goat. That is, of course, if your grandma says that you can keep him. I'll let you take him home with you now, and you can ask her about it." So Uncle Robert unfastened the rope from the post and gave the end of it to Walter. He took it and thanked Uncle Robert many times. He was proud to think that he owned a live goat, and he thought to himself what good times he was going to have with him. "Come on, goat," said he. "You're going to your new home now. Come on." The goat followed along very quietly, with the rope around his neck. Walter went out into the road and started off towards home, with the goat following along meekly behind him. Walter felt very large and like a man to think that the goat was all his own. He held his head up very high, and walked along as happy as a king. When they got down the road a little way, the goat suddenly put down his head and made a rush. Whack! Plunk! He butted Walter right in the middle of the back, and knocked him off his feet, flat in the dusty road. "Oh! Oh!" cried Walter. "I'm killed!" He was not really hurt, but his clothes were all dust, and his face was dirty. When he got up again, the goat was standing quietly by the side of the road, eating a large burdock leaf. He looked very thoughtful. "I think it must have been an accident," said Walter doubtfully. "Perhaps I was walking too slowly, and so he ran up against me." He picked up the rope again and called to the goat to come on. The goat took another bite of the burdock leaf and started along once more very meekly. Walter walked on, a little anxious at first, but pretty soon he began to think of how he would astonish Grandma and Mabel when he reached home. Just then the goat put his head down and made a second rush. Whack! Plunk! He struck Walter right in the middle of the back again, and this time he knocked him away over into the grass by the side of the road. Walter was thoroughly frightened and began to cry. He did not dare to get up, but just lay there calling for help. Uncle Robert had been watching the two, and when the goat first knocked Walter over, he had walked down the road and followed him. He was now very near, though neither the goat nor Walter had seen him. When Walter began crying for help, Uncle Robert ran up. He took the rope, and with the thick end of it, he gave the goat a good whipping. The goat bleated with fright and pain. "There, take that, you brute!" cried Uncle Robert, as he gave the goat a last blow across the back. "If you play any more of your tricks, I'll tie you up and whip you with the carriage whip." Then he picked up Walter and comforted him. It was a long time before he could persuade him to lead the goat any more, but finally he succeeded, and the two went on again. This time the goat, who was very much afraid of Uncle Robert, kept very still and followed Walter quietly all the way home, like the best goat in the world. Grandma and Mabel were in the front yard when Walter led the goat in and told them this was Uncle Robert's birthday present to him. Grandma said that Walter might keep him, and they all went out into the back yard to see where he was to be put. Walter tied the goat to a clothes post and brought him some turnips to eat. "Tomorrow," said Grandma, "I'll have a man come and make a goat house for him, and I'll get the harness maker to make a little harness. We can buy a goat wagon in the village, and then you'll be all ready to drive him around. But what's the matter with your clothes, Walter? They're all covered with dust." I fell down," said Walter, rather sheepishly. He was ashamed to say that the goat had butted him. All that day the goat stood in the yard as quiet as could be. The children gave him his supper at night and some water to drink, and when they went to bed he seemed to be quite satisfied with his new home. The lights were all put out, and the whole family were just getting to sleep, when they heard a fearful noise in the yard. "Meh!" Everyone sat up in bed to listen. "Meh!" Oh, what's the matter?" cried out Walter, in a frightened voice from his room. "I think it's the goat," said Grandma. "You'd better put on your clothes and go out and see." Walter slipped on his trousers and ran down into the yard. Just as he went out of the door, the noise was heard a third time. "Meh!" It was the goat. "What's the matter?" asked Walter, when he reached the place where the goat was tied. "Are you feeling sick?" The goat said nothing. He looked as calm as could be as he stood there in the moonlight. There was nothing the matter with him. "Don't do that again," said Walter. "You'll keep us all awake." The goat said nothing. Walter went back into the house and got back into bed. Just as he was getting asleep again, the goat began once more. "Meh!" This time he roared it in a deep voice, like a great horn, and in a few minutes he repeated it. "This is fearful," said Grandma. "Walter, go out again and see if you can't stop him." So Walter went out a second time and talked with the goat, who kept very still till Walter was gone, and then he began again. All night long he bleated and bellowed, and neither Grandma nor Mabel nor Walter got any sleep at all. In the morning they all went out again and argued with the goat, and scolded him till he looked as though he was ashamed. And then Walter gave him some breakfast. "Perhaps he was hungry," said Walter. "To-night I'll leave him some food to eat when I go to bed." All that day the goat kept very still. The harness was not yet ready for him, so Walter could not make any use of him, but just amused himself watching the goat eat and drink. At night he left a pile of chopped up vegetables by the side of the clothes post, and everyone went to bed feeling sure that the goat would be quiet and not disturb them. But as soon as the lights were out, he began his noise again, bleating and bellowing just as before. At last Grandma got up and dressed herself, and she and Walter went out and unfastened the goat and led him down to the orchard, further away from the house, and fastened him to a peg in the ground. After that he kept bleating, but they didn't mind it so much because it didn't seem so loud. The next morning the harness maker brought the harness, and the goat wagon also came. Walter was greatly excited. "Now then," he said, "I'm going to have some fun." He led the goat into the yard and put his harness on. First he put the bridle on the goat's head. Then he fastened on the straps around the goat's body. And finally he hitched the traces to the wagon. He took the whip in his hands and got up on the wagon seat and picked up the reins. "Hurrah!" he cried. "This is better than a horse. Just see me drive." Then he said to the goat, "Get up!" But the goat didn't stir. He just waited and stood perfectly still. "Get up!" said Walter again. The goat never budged. Then Walter grew very angry and lifted his whip and struck the goat over the back as hard as he could. "Get up!" he cried. Like lightning, the goat gave a great jump. He put his head down and made one rush across the yard, lickety-split. Slam bang, over humps and hillocks, jouncing the goat wagon so that it nearly upset. "Whoa! Whoa!" cried Walter, frightened half to death. But the goat kept on whirling around and tearing back again the same way he had come, jumpity-jump, till all of a sudden the wagon struck the clothes post and split in two. One wheel went one way, and another another. The seat flew up, and Walter was thrown like a cannonball across the yard, striking on his face. The harness broke, and the goat was set free. But he still kept dashing about till he had rushed through Grandma's flower beds and trampled all her flowers down under his hoofs. Then he stopped and gave a tremendous bleat. "Ma!" Grandma ran and picked up Walter. His clothing was torn and covered with dust, and his face was cut open so that the blood streamed down his cheeks and smeared them all over red. He screamed with fright and pain. Grandma took him in her arms and carried him into the house. She washed his face and put on a big piece of court plaster, changed his coat, and then got him to lie down on the sofa. Then she went out and took the goat back into the orchard, and tied him once more to the peg in the ground. Coming back to the house, she put on her bonnet. "I'm going down to Uncle Roberts's," she said to Mabel, "to ask him to come and take the goat back again. I never saw such a dreadful animal. We haven't had a moment's peace since he came." Mabel was very serious. "Very well, Grandma," she said, "but the goat will never be bad again." "What do you mean, Mabel?" asked Grandma. "I'm going to talk to him while you are away," said Mabel, "and I promise that when you come back he will be a good goat." "Nonsense, Mabel," said Grandma sharply. "What good is it talking to a goat, and such a goat?" "Never mind, Grandma," said Mabel. "You wait and see." As soon as Grandma was out of sight, Mabel went down into the orchard. There was the goat tied to the peg. When he saw her coming, he cocked one eye impudently and laughed. "Ma!" he said. He was very proud of what he had done. "Goat," said Mabel, looking him straight in the face, "you have been a very bad goat. We have been good to you, and fed you, and petted you, and you have done everything you could that was naughty. You have kept us awake all night, and now you have hurt Walter, and broken his wagon, and trampled down Grandma's flower beds. How can you be so bad?" The goat looked very saucy and wrinkled up his nose. "Ma!" he said as loud as he could. "Now, goat," said Mabel, "if you keep on being naughty, you'll be very sorry. I'm going to stop you from ever doing anything bad again. I will—" "Ma!" bellowed the goat. "Stop!" cried Mabel. "Don't you bleat again." "Ma!" bellowed the goat. "All right for you. Now I'm going to punish you." "Ma!" bellowed the goat, and he put down his head and tried to butt her. Mabel didn't say another word, but ran back to the house and put on her sunbonnet. Then she went straight down to the woods. When she got there, she looked all around and whistled the lizard's call as loud as she could. The first time she whistled, she got no answer. But when she whistled the second time, she heard a big, deep growl away off in the distance, and pretty soon footsteps pattering among the dried leaves on the ground. Then a great black head was thrust out of the bushes, and the good wolf came trotting up to her. "Do you want me?" growled he in his deep, rough voice. "Yes, I want you right away," said Mabel. "I want you to come with me to my house. No one will see you except a bad goat, and I want you to help me punish him." "Can I eat him up?" asked the wolf eagerly, beginning to lick his chops. "No," said Mabel, "not unless I tell you to. I want you to hide in the currant bushes, and when I whistle, run out and pretend you're going to eat him up. Look as fierce as you can, but don't really touch him unless I say so." "All right," growled the wolf.
but I'd rather eat him anyway."
So the wolf went along with Mabel to the house and followed her down near the orchard, where he hid in the currant bushes. Then Mabel walked up to the goat again. "Goat," she said, shaking her little finger at him, "this is the last time I'm going to ask you to be good. If you don't mind, I'll make you so sorry that you'll never forget it as long as you live." "Ma!" bellowed the goat, and tried to butt her with his horns. Mabel gave a loud whistle. In half a second, out from the currant bushes rushed the great black wolf, his hair bristling up all over his body, his eyes blazing like coals of fire, his big mouth wide open, and his long white teeth gleaming. He made a plunge toward the goat. The goat gave one look and then began to scream with terror. His eyes nearly popped out of his head, and the end of his nose turned as white as a sheet. "Stop, wolf!" cried Mabel, raising her hand. The wolf stopped. His jaws were close to the goat's face, and he gave a roar that made the goat's blood run cold. "Now, goat," said Mabel, "perhaps you will believe me next time. Here is a wolf who will eat you up in a minute if I tell him to. Do you want to be eaten?" "No!" screamed the goat. "Then you've got to promise me to be a good goat hereafter. Are you sorry for being so naughty?" "Yes!" bleated the goat. He was shaking like a leaf. "Will you promise to let Walter ride you and drive you whenever he wants to?" "Yes!" bleated the goat. "Will you promise never to make a sound in the night?" "Yes!" bleated the goat. Then he knelt down and put his head between Mabel's feet and shivered. "Well, wolf," said Mabel, "you hear what the goat has promised. Now if he breaks his promise, I will send for you again, and the next time you can eat him up every bit." The wolf gave a terrible growl that made the goat nearly jump out of his skin. "All right," said the wolf. "Goodbye now," said Mabel. And the wolf turned around and went slowly off through the fields into the woods. When he had gone, the goat looked up and bleated pitifully to Mabel. Just at that moment, Grandma came in at the front yard. Mabel called her. "Uncle Robert wasn't home," said Grandma, "so we'll have to wait till tomorrow." "Never mind, Grandma," said Mabel. "You know I told you that the goat would never be bad again. Well, he won't. Just see." Then Mabel untied the goat and got up on his back. "Trot," she said to the goat. He trotted quietly around the meadow and came back again to where Grandma was standing. Dear me," said Grandma. "Why, he seems like another goat." "Now follow us quietly to the house," said Mabel. The goat followed them. They called Walter down and told him to get on the goat's back. For a long time he was afraid to do so, but finally he tried it and let the goat trot around with him. When he told the goat to stop, he stopped, and he minded every word that Walter said to him. "Now," said Mabel, "you get the goat wagon and the harness mended, and you'll never have any trouble with the goat again as long as he lives." "Well, this is wonderful," said Grandma. "What on earth did you do to him while I was away to make him so good?" "Oh," said Mabel, smiling a little to herself, "I just talked to him." End of chapter 6.